I will begin where I am, because I no longer have anywhere else to begin from. I am in a small white room on a human world whose name I was never told. There is a window. Through it I can see a garden, and beyond the garden a city, and the city is whole and bright and unafraid, and that more than the loss of the fleets, more than the death of the Ascendancy, more than my own ruin, is the thing I cannot look at for very long. An unafraid city. I spent 200 years ensuring that no such thing existed anywhere the Ascendancy could reach. And here is one, full of the people who destroyed us, and they do not even bother to be afraid of me. They feed me, they are unfailingly polite. A young human comes each day to check that the recording device is working and to ask if I need anything, and she calls me sir, and I have come to understand that this courtesy is not mercy. It is the deepest contempt a victor can show. They have decided I am not worth hating. They have decided that what I am, what the whole Ascendancy was, is best preserved, like a specimen, so that their children can study how a thing so large could die so fast. So I will tell it, not for them, for us, for the dead. For the 400 species we ruled and the one we could not, so that somewhere in whatever archive survives us, there is a true record of how the Ascendancy of 10,000 years was undone in 11 weeks by a species we outnumbered, outgunned, and outranged in every measurable way, and how I, Silas Crane, the voice that had never once failed to make a world kneel, spoke the words that killed my own civilization, on orders, against my own judgment, into a camera that the entire galaxy was watching. Let me tell you first the thing that no one in the Ascendancy ever understood, the thing I came to understand only in this white room, far too late to matter. We never had the strength we claimed. No empire does. The Ascendancy ruled 1,000 worlds and 400 species, and we could not have fought even 10 of them at once if they had truly meant it. Our power was never our fleets. Our power was that no one ever made us use the fleets. We ruled by reputation. We ruled by the certainty, planted in every conquered mind across 10,000 years, that resistance was not merely doomed but unthinkable, that to defy the Ascendancy was as senseless as defying gravity. Fear is a loan, you see. We borrowed obedience against the threat of force, and we never had to pay because no one ever called the debt due. For 10,000 years no one called it due. And then we made the mistake of issuing a demand to a species that did not believe in gravity. Aye. The decision I argued against. I want it on this record, for whatever my word is now worth, that I argued against the ultimatum to humanity. I argued against it in the highest chamber of the Ascendancy, before the throne itself, and I was overruled, and then I was ordered to deliver the very thing I had warned against, because the Ascendancy did not waste a voice on errands it considered safe. They sent me precisely because I had objected. They believed my reluctance was timidity, and they wished to cure me of it by making me witness, with my own senses, how wrong I was. So let me explain why I objected, because in my objection is the whole seed of our ruin. Humanity came to our attention the way young species always do, a smudge of radio noise resolving into a civilization, a handful of colonies spreading out from a single blue world, primitive by our standards, their largest warships no match for our smallest. By every metric the Ascendancy used to assess a target, they were trivial. The assessment that crossed my desk recommended immediate absorption, standard ultimatum, standard timeline, a formality. But I had read the deep files. I had read the things the assessment summarized and discarded. And what I read frightened me in a way I did not have language for, because it did not fit any category the Ascendancy possessed. I read their history, not their technology, their history. And what I found was a species that, across its entire existence, had displayed a single consistent behavior that no other species in our records had ever shown with such totality. They did not surrender to fear. They surrendered to force sometimes when force had actually been applied and had actually won, but they did not surrender to the mere promise of force, no matter how overwhelming. Over and over, across their bloody little history, individual humans and whole human nations had been told to kneel by powers vastly greater than themselves. And over, in numbers that defied reason, they had refused, had fought hopeless wars, had died in causes already lost, had chosen annihilation over submission, not because they believed they would win, but because something in them would rather break than bend. And worse, this was the part that woke me in the night before the chamber convened. They celebrated the ones who did it. Their entire culture was built around the memory of the hopeless stand, the doomed defiance, the few who said no to the many and died for it. They taught it to their children as the highest virtue. They carved it into their monuments. To a human, the most beautiful story that exists is the story of someone who refused to surrender when surrender was the only sane choice. I stood before the throne and I said, "This is the one species to whom we must not issue an ultimatum, not because they can defeat us. They cannot. But because our entire power rests on the certainty that the rational mind chooses survival, and this species has spent its whole history proving to itself in story and stone that there is something it values more than survival. If we demand their surrender, they will not weigh the odds. They will simply refuse because refusing is who they have decided to be. And the whole galaxy will be watching us demand it." The throne heard me. And the throne gave the order anyway, for a reason that was, I must admit, not stupid. The throne said, "If what you say is true, then they are a contagion, and a contagion must be cauterized while it is small. Better to provoke the refusal now, while they are one world and a few colonies, and make of them an example so total that no other species ever dares to remember them. Deliver the ultimatum, Crane. And when they refuse, we will erase them so completely that their defiance dies with them. And the lesson the galaxy learns is not that the Ascendancy can be defied, but that defiance is the shortest road to oblivion." It was a coherent plan. I have had a long time to think about it in this white room, and I still cannot find the precise flaw in the logic. The flaw was not in the logic. The flaw was in the assumption underneath the logic, the assumption that we could erase them faster than they could be seen. We could not. That is the whole of it. In the age of instant transmission, you cannot cauterize a contagion of the spirit, because the spirit travels faster than the fire. The warning. I delivered the ultimatum myself, from the bridge of the Adamant Crown, the flagship of the Reaping Fleet. 40 of the largest warships the Ascendancy possessed, more than enough firepower to render every human world lifeless, arranged in a formation designed across 10,000 years for one purpose: to be the last thing a defiant species ever sees. We translated out of the deep at the edge of their home system, and I had the fleet arrange itself so that from the surface of their blue world it would be visible to the naked eye, a new constellation, a wound in their familiar sky. This is technique. A voice learns that the surrender must be demanded not from hiding, but from a position of total, undeniable, visible superiority. The target must look up and see its death already arranged overhead. Then I opened a channel to their entire species at once, every frequency, every band, the way I had done 400 times. And I spoke the words I had spoken 400 times, in their own language, which I had learned for the occasion as a voice always does, because the demand to surrender is most devastating when it is delivered in the tongue of the one surrendering. I told them what they were, a young species alone, outmatched beyond any hope of resistance. I told them what we were, the Ascendancy of 10,000 years, 400 species, 1,000 worlds, and I showed them, in images, what became of those who refused us. I gave them the terms, which were the terms I always gave: complete submission, the dissolution of their governments, the integration of their worlds and their labor and their futures into the Ascendancy, in exchange for their continued existence. And I gave them the timeline. They had 30 of their days to accept. It was, by the standards of my office, a generous offer. We did not demand their lives, only their knees. I expected one of 3 responses, because in 400 deliveries I had only ever received 3. I expected immediate capitulation, which was most common, a frightened government, doing the arithmetic, choosing life. I expected desperate negotiation, an attempt to bargain for better terms, which always failed but which I permitted, because the bargaining itself is a form of submission. Or I expected, rarely, a doomed military response. A few ships flung against the reaping fleet, destroyed in moments, after which the surrender always came. I did not receive any of the 3. For 19 days, humanity did not answer me at all. IV, the silence and what grew in it. I have learned in this room what was happening during those 19 days, and I will set it down, because it is the part the Ascendancy never saw and the part that mattered most. We watched their world during the silence. We watched it with every instrument the adamant crown possessed, expecting to see the things that always preceded a surrender: the panic, the riots, the collapse of order, the frantic gathering of leaders to compose their capitulation. These are the universal signs of a species doing the arithmetic of fear, and a voice learns to read them the way a physician reads a fever. We saw none of them. We saw, instead, something that our analysts could not interpret, and that I now understand with perfect, unbearable clarity. We saw a planet, and the dozens of colonies and stations spread across their little volume of space go quiet in a way that was not the quiet of fear but the quiet of work. We saw their industry, which we had assessed as primitive, do something our models said was impossible. We saw a civilian shipping economy, freighters, or haulers, passenger liners, the unglamorous circulatory system of a spacefaring species begin within days to transform itself, not into a navy. They did not have time to build a navy, and they knew it, and they did not try. They did something we had no doctrine for, because no species we had ever conquered would have considered it. They armed everything. Every ship that could hold a weapon received one. Every hull that could carry a reactor became a fire ship. Mining vessels designed to crack asteroids were pointed at us. Colony transports built to carry families were packed instead with volunteers and ordnance. They did not field a fleet. They emptied their entire civilization into the void and pointed it at the reaping fleet, and they crewed it not with soldiers. They had only a handful of soldiers, but with everyone: dock workers, pilots, engineers, teachers, the old, the young. Anyone who could be taught which control fired the weapon. Our analysts saw the numbers and dismissed them. A swarm of armed civilian ships, however large, could not threaten 40 Ascendancy warships of the line. This was true. It remained true to the very end. The human armada that eventually came for us was, ship for ship, a joke. We destroyed them at a ratio that should have been decisive. I want that understood. We won every exchange of fire. We were winning the battle when the Ascendancy died. That is the lesson I have spent my captivity learning. We were never going to lose the battle. The battle was never the war. Because on the 19th day, humanity finally answered my ultimatum. And the answer was not aimed at me, or at the reaping fleet at all. It was aimed at everyone else who was watching. The answer. They did not send their answer on a private channel, the way a surrendering species sends its capitulation, quietly, with downcast dignity. They did the opposite. They took the answer and they broadcast it on every frequency, in every direction, at maximum power, not toward the adamant crown but outward into the galaxy, on the open bands that every species the Ascendancy ruled could receive. They made their answer to my private ultimatum into a public message, addressed to the 400 conquered species watching from 1,000 worlds. And they did not send a leader to deliver it. This was the choice that I believe now was the true masterstroke, though I do not think it was calculated. I think it was simply who they are. They did not send a president or an admiral or a great general the way protocol and dignity would demand. They understood instinctively, the way they understand everything that matters, that to send a great leader would be to imply that defiance required greatness, that only the strong could refuse. So they sent a woman named Ruth Calloway who was nobody. I have her file now. The humans gave it to me, I think to make a point. She was a schoolteacher from one of the outer colonies, 44 years old. She had no rank, no title, no significance whatsoever. She had volunteered to crew one of the armed transports, and someone, no one has ever told me who, and I suspect no one decided it in any formal way, someone simply chose her, because she was ordinary, because she was exactly the kind of person the Ascendancy's offer was supposed to terrify into submission. And Ruth Calloway looked into the camera that the entire galaxy was watching, and she gave humanity's answer to the Ascendancy of 10,000 years. I have watched the recording more times than I can count. I will not pretend to give you her exact words, because the words were not the point, and I do not want to reduce them. But I will tell you the shape of what she said, because the shape is what undid us. She did not threaten us. She did not boast. She did not claim humanity could win because they could not, and she knew it, and she said so plainly. She looked into the camera and admitted freely to the whole watching galaxy that the Ascendancy would probably destroy them. She held nothing back about the odds. That was the first thing that broke our power, though we did not feel it yet. She was not afraid to name our strength. Fear cannot rule a mind that will calmly look at the thing it fears and describe it out loud. And then, having admitted that they would likely lose, she said that they were going to refuse anyway. And she explained why, not to us, but to the 400 conquered species listening from 1,000 worlds. She said that her people had a long history of being told to kneel by things larger than themselves, and that they had learned something across that history worth more than any colony or fleet or even than survival itself. She said that the moment you kneel because you are afraid, you do not buy your life. You only rent it, and the landlord is fear, and the rent goes up forever, and your children inherit the debt. She said humanity had decided, long ago, that they would rather pay everything once than pay a little forever. And then she said the thing that killed us. She did not say it to us. She said it to them, to the 400. She said, "We know you are listening. We know you have knelt to them for 10,000 years because you believed it was the only way to live. We are about to show you that it was never the only way. It was only the only way that doesn't hurt. Watch what we do. And then ask yourselves how many of them there really are. Ask yourselves how many of them there really are." She had seen it. This ordinary schoolteacher had seen the thing I had tried to tell the throne, the thing the throne had refused to understand. She had seen that the Ascendancy was a bluff. That 400 species could not be held by a power that could only be in one place at a time. That the whole vast structure of our rule was a single, fragile, 10,000-year-old idea. Resistance is unthinkable. And that the instant one species made it thinkable in front of everyone, the idea would die and the structure would come down. She had 11 weeks to live when she said it. She knew that too. You could see it in her face. She was not a soldier and not a hero by temperament. She was a frightened middle-aged woman who had volunteered to die so that a watching galaxy could see an ordinary person refuse. And she did it without flinching, and the galaxy saw. I stood on the bridge of the adamant crown, and I heard her words go out on every band in every direction, and I felt the loan come due. 10,000 years of borrowed fear, called in all at once by a schoolteacher. I gave the order to attack. What else was there to do? But I knew in the moment I gave it that it no longer mattered whether we won. The Armadas. The human armada came for the reaping fleet 5 days later, and it came in a form that our doctrine had no name for, and that I will carry behind my eyes until I die. It was not a fleet. A fleet has formation, discipline, capital ships and screening elements, a logic our tacticians could read and counter. What came at us out of the dark was the contents of a civilization, thousands upon thousands of ships of every shape and purpose, freighters and tugs and liners and haulers and yachts and station shuttles, none of them built for war, all of them armed, all of them crewed by people who were not soldiers and who were, every one of them, willing to die. They came without elegant formation because they had no training in formation. They came in a vast, ragged, unstoppable tide, and they did not maneuver to preserve themselves, because preserving themselves was never the plan. They came to be seen dying. That was the strategy, though I did not understand it until much later. Every human ship that burned in front of our guns was a transmission. They had cameras on everything. Every exchange was broadcast live to the 400 conquered worlds. And what the 400 saw was not humanity losing. What they saw was humanity refusing. Ship after ship, ordinary person after ordinary person, flying into the guns of the Ascendancy and dying with their cameras running, and not one of them turning back. We won the battle. I must keep saying it because it is the most important and least relevant fact of the whole war. We destroyed them at a ratio of perhaps 30-1. The void around the adamant crown became a field of human wreckage so vast that our sensors struggled to see through it. By every measure the Ascendancy used to define victory, we were victorious. But the broadcasts had reached the 400. And on the 400 worlds, the thing the throne had feared above all things, the thing I had named in the high chamber, the contagion of the spirit it took. The first world to rise was the oldest one we ruled, a species we had conquered 9,000 years before, so long ago that their submission was woven into their religion. They saw the humans die refusing, and they heard the schoolteacher's question, how many of them are there really? And they did the arithmetic that fear had forbidden them to do for 9,000 years, and they found the answer that had always been true. There were not enough of us. There had never been enough of us. There were 40 warships at humanity's world, and a few hundred more scattered across 1,000 worlds to hold 400 species in line. And the holding had only ever worked because no one tried the door. Humanity tried the door on camera and showed everyone that it was not locked. It had never been locked. It had only been painted to look like a wall. Within 3 weeks, 200 worlds were in open revolt. Within 5, the number was beyond counting. The reaping fleet was recalled from humanity's system, recalled in the middle of a victory, summoned home to put down rebellions that were multiplying faster than we could reach them. And that recall was itself broadcast, and the sight of the Ascendancy's dread fleet turning away from the world it had come to erase was the final proof the galaxy needed. We had blinked. Empires do not survive blinking. I never fired on humanity's world. I never got the chance. I had come to erase them, and instead I spent the last 11 weeks of the Ascendancy chasing fires across 1,000 worlds, and every world I reached had 2 more burning behind it, and somewhere in those weeks I understood that I was not fighting a war anymore. I was attending a funeral that took 11 weeks and spanned 1,000 worlds, and the corpse was the only thing I had ever served. Why they spared me. The Ascendancy did not fall in a final battle. There was no last stand, no climactic clash of fleets. That is the part that the humans, I think, find most instructive and the part I find most humiliating. We did not die fighting. We dissolved. The 400 species simply stopped obeying all at once everywhere, and an empire that rules by obedience and stops being obeyed is not defeated. It is revealed as the thing it always was, nothing. A reputation. A story everyone had agreed to believe, until one species refused to believe it out loud. By the end I commanded the adamant crown and perhaps a dozen ships still loyal, the last fragment of a thing that had ruled 1,000 worlds. The newly free species had begun to build something together, a council, they called it, and humanity sat in it not as a ruler but as one voice among many, which I did not understand then and am only beginning to understand now. And they sent ships to find me, the last voice, the one who had delivered the ultimatum that started it all. I expected execution. I wanted execution, I think. There is a clean dignity in being killed by the people you wronged. It would have meant they still took me seriously enough to hate. They did not kill me. The human admiral who took my surrender, her name was Naomi Hart, and she had been one of the few actual soldiers humanity possessed, and she had watched 10,000 of her people fly into our guns on purpose. She looked at me across the bridge of my ruined flagship, and there was no hatred in it, and no triumph. There was something worse. There was a kind of weary recognition, the look you give a force of nature that has finished doing the only thing it knows how to do. She told me that they were not going to execute me, and that they were not going to imprison me as punishment, and that the only thing they wanted from me was the truth, the whole account, in my own words, of how it had felt to be the one who warned them. She told me they wanted it preserved, so that their children and the children of the 400 would understand exactly how an empire of 10,000 years had been ended, so that no one would ever build another one believing that fear was a foundation you could stand on. And then she said the thing that I have not been able to stop hearing, the thing that finally made me understand what we had been dealing with all along, the thing the schoolteacher Ruth Calloway had been trying to tell the galaxy from the start. She said, "You warned us to surrender because you thought we were afraid to die. We were never afraid to die. We were afraid of exactly one thing, and it's the thing you built your whole empire out of. We were afraid of living on our knees. You offered us the one thing we feared most and called it mercy. That's why you lost. You never once understood that the thing you were threatening us with, survival without dignity, was the thing we'd already decided was worse than death." Then she gave me this room, and this recorder, and the instruction I began with. VIII, the last thing I understand. I have been in this white room for a long time now. The earth tree they planted in the garden outside my window, the humans plant trees everywhere they go, I have noticed, as if to insist on a future, has grown taller in the time I have been recording this. I will likely die here, of age, in a small clean room, spared by the people I came to erase, which is the most complete defeat the universe could have devised for a voice of the Ascendancy. And I have come to my last understanding, the one I want to leave at the end of this record, for the dead and for whoever finds it. We were not destroyed by human armadas. I have made that clear, I hope, though the histories the free worlds tell will probably say otherwise, because the human armadas showed up is a better story than the truth. The armadas were real, and they were brave beyond anything I had words for, and they died in numbers that still make my breath catch. But they did not destroy us. They could not have. Ship for ship, we beat them to the very end. We were destroyed by a single idea, set loose at the worst possible moment, in front of the worst possible audience. The idea that the rent of fear does not have to be paid, that a species can look at a power vastly greater than itself and decide that there is something it will not trade for survival, and that the deciding, done openly, where others can see it, is itself the most powerful weapon in existence, because it is the one weapon that an empire of fear has no defense against. You cannot threaten a creature into submission, once it has publicly, calmly, decided that submission is the only thing it fears more than you. I warned humanity to surrender. I stood on the bridge of the greatest warship ever built, and I offered them their lives in exchange for their knees, in the certainty that any rational mind would take the deal. And they answered by teaching 400 enslaved species in 11 weeks that the deal had always been a lie, that we had been selling, for 10,000 years, a safety we did not possess, paid for in a currency of fear that only had value as long as no one refused to spend it. The terrible thing, the thing I will take to my quiet death in this quiet room, is that I knew. I stood before the throne and I knew, and I said it, and I was overruled, and then I delivered the words anyway, because I was a voice of the Ascendancy, and a voice does not refuse. I have all beings surrendered to fear. And humanity, who I was sent to teach the meaning of surrender, never surrendered to anything at all. That is the whole of my testimony. The Ascendancy is dead. It was killed by a schoolteacher's question and 10,000 ordinary people who chose to be seen refusing. They asked me how it felt to be the one who warned them. It felt like being the man who lit the match. In a room I had spent my whole life insisting could never burn, and watching it catch, and understanding only as the flames rose that the room had been made of fear, and fear, it turns out, is the most flammable thing in all the universe.